Three, two, one, and welcome back to the SBH podcast. Okay, so in today's episode of the SBH podcast, I'm going to be talking about the upcoming full moon of July. It's really the first full moon that I feel like we get into that summer fishing ability. Pretty much that's the time we have the biggest fish around. And I asked a question on on my Instagram about what do you guys, or ask questions about this full moon. So we'll get to the questions later, but you might realize that I'm in a spot that I haven't been doing the podcast in, and I'm in my garage. I got my fishing stuff around me. I'm gonna be rigging some eels on this podcast, and just hang out, because I gotta rig some eels. So I decided, why not just do a podcast as I'm rigging eels. I am in the garage, so I'm sorry if there's a little echo going on, but it is what it is. And hopefully for now, from here on out, we're gonna be able to have a higher quality podcast with both audio and video. We've been working on it, the best way to do it, and I think we finally figured it out. So here we go, I guess. I'm gonna be rigging eels on this podcast. I'm not gonna really go into any depth of how I rig the eel per se, because I think that it's just a little boring if I go over rigging 4 or 5 eels, because I'm just gonna be doing the same thing over and over again. So you can watch me and you can try to mimic. I am gonna do a quick tip on how I rig eels at some point. I gotta do that. So I'm just gonna get into kind of what I've been thinking so far as I start to rig these eels this year. For this moon phase. And I feel like my main goal for every season is to do better than last year. And that's how it's always been. And personally, I did better this spring than I did last year. My team, which is really my family, and when we fish, I got them all of them. I fished the most seriously, but sometimes they'll tag along with me, and I got I got both my dad and my brother on two 48-inch bass last spring, and a 44-inch bass on topwater plug last spring. And this spring, and I didn't get anything big. I got a bunch of low 30s to mid 30-inch bass, nothing crazy. But then this spring I got a 35 and a 40-inch early for me personally. So I feel better. I think, to myself at least, that I've done better than I did the season before. I'm just gonna grab a bucket of eels here that I'm gonna be rigging. So let's just grab this guy out first. I'm gonna be rigging these eels, but I'm fishing tonight with them, so it's all good to rig an eel and then fish it. It's always good to see how productive they are, I guess. I've been doing well on rigged eels. I've been catching a lot of my bigger fish on the rigged eels. I've been doing okay on plugs. Although the fishing has been, after early spring, when we got a few 40-inch bass around the new moon and the full moon, then it kind of slowed down a little bit. And I was a little bit disappointed, because I was hoping to do a little bit better, but it kind of slowed down a little bit. So it was very tough. And then I just was like, screw it, I'm not gonna be really targeting larger bass right now, because it just is not being productive, and it's just a waste of my time. And now is the first day I feel like I might have a better shot at landing or getting into a bass over 40 inches. And so I don't have any live eels, because I'm gonna be fishing mostly live eels around the real full moon, which is the 5th, I believe. And I wanted to talk about this because I make a plan in the wintertime about what I'm gonna do during each moon. And I look at the tides and I have a rough idea, but then depending on how the fishing is, as I like to call it, the seasonal variables, depending on the seasonal variables will be how I am fishing during that actual moon. Even though my plan might change, but it's just, depending on the seasonal variables, will change how I'm fishing that moon phase. And I've tended to be doing a lot of my fishing. I just was really targeting big bass early in the season, and I did that very hard, and I caught my 2 bigger bass this season, and it included the 40-inch bass, and I'm stoked about that. I feel like that was a solid fishing for me, at least. I felt like that was. I feel like I achieved that goal for this season. Now I have other goals like learning how to fish the estuaries better, and I think that I need to give the estuary more credit earlier than it deserves, or that it did last year, that I thought it deserved. And also the rivers, because the rivers were very productive early in the season. And I did mostly fished off the rocks early in the season. And the reason for that is just the amount of large bunker that were around was crazy, and I'm just way more confident off the rocks. And we did see 40-inch bass off the rocks in May, in that full moon of May. And I didn't do very well just after that. Is actually when I started getting into some bigger bass, and which was really cool to see the bass starting to get bigger around then. And then you get into the season a little bit later, and then you get those and then it feels like it kind of tails off a little bit. And there's this section, which is this moon phase, that I did not do well in last year. I didn't catch really anything big this moon phase, and so pretty much from the spring fishing to late July, I didn't catch anything in that section. Like, I didn't do well in that section. It's not that I didn't catch anything, I just didn't do as well as I wanted to. And this season, my main goal is to do better in that section of the year, which is right now. And so I'm doing different tactics. Like, I am fishing harder and smarter than I did last season at this time. And that's always the thing. For me, I don't want to spend too much time I don't want to waste too much time on something that's not working. If something isn't working, then it's not going to work. Although there are certain areas that, I kid you not, it's like you have to spend hours there fishing to get that 140-inch bass. And that's what I did this year. I got one probably 25-inch fish, and then I hooked my 40-inch bass. So it's one of those things that, like, you kind of have to play it by ear, and you got to play it by experience. And I knew from experience that spot tends to turn on a little bit later in the evening. In general. Oh no, my phone. So we're actually filming on a camera, so I can look at like what time it is and everything like that today. But I want to get back to this. So I was doing a lot of fishing early in the season, trying to really find those bigger fish, and I wasn't doing all that well. And then all of a sudden that the new moon started to roll around, and I started to really figure out some bites, and I'm gonna try to carry them into this time of the year, and see if I can actually, did I come on a 9? That's not what I want to do. I see if I can actually pull them into this moon phase, which is, for me, it's one of the most important moon phases, because this is the one that if I can do well at, then I feel very confident going into later in the season. And that's the thing, like, even if I don't do well this moon phase, it's not the end of the world. Damn, got stuck in there on something. Come on. Oh, I just got out. Okay, that's pretty nasty. Here we go. What the hell's that? Here we go. Pull that. Awesome. Okay. Got the string out. Anyway, if you didn't see that, my rigging needle just got caught inside the fish, inside the eel. So I was trying to pull it through. Anyway, and if I don't end up catching a big fish this moon phase, I'm not gonna be too worried. It's just something that I need to focus on for next year and try to plan better for. If I can't do it, that means that quite clearly the spots that I'm fishing at don't fish well this time of year, and I need to figure some other stuff out later in the season. But the people that I've talked to have all said that the spring was horrible for us, and it was not good. Dating all the way back to the first bass of the season, It was the biggest struggle to get on. And now I'm just trying to, oh no, that's tough, man. Hold on, that's so annoying. The struggles of open eye hooks here. Anyway, but dating all the way back to the beginning of the season when we had really bad fishing early in the season. I'm gonna have to redo that again. And that's something that, I'm just trying to squeeze these open eye hooks to get them to close up a little bit better. People like to solder them together and stuff. I just can't deal with that. I don't have enough patience. Probably gonna, one of these days I'm gonna shove this giant hook through my hand. That's a little bit annoying, whatever. I'm gonna have to put a little bit of putty on that or something. Okay, let's do that again. You know what, I'm gonna just throw that away and we're gonna try that one more time. Anyway, struggles of rigging eels, right? So even dating back to the beginning of the season, with all that rain bait we had around, it wasn't great fishing. And that is, you know, it's one of those things that I didn't expect to happen early. It was just so weird because, you know, normally you're spring fishing, you have the bass in the estuaries and around the sandy beaches, but you don't expect like the bass to be the fishing to be so different than last year early. And then you think, the bass have just been really strangely finicky early in the season as well. And I was dealing with that whole thing where the bass were not really doing, and most of my fishing is topwater based fishing. I fished 99.9% on the surface of the water during the day. That's just how I do. And that's how I fish. And I don't like fishing under the surface of the water. Now, I had to change that at the beginning of the season because the fish were just not dealing with that in the beginning of the season. They didn't want to be on the surface of the water. They were all being super slow, very like, and I've talked nauseam about this, but how bad it was. But so I won't really continue on that. But you know, the fishing just wasn't great. And then we led into that whole section of the fishing not being that great. And if I was lucky enough to throw some rig deals during the day and pull some bigger bass on rig deals, and then after that was really going down, I decided to really fully pursue the bigger fish on these rig deals because quite clearly they want the rig deals. We have been fishing also soft plastics have been fishing well. Big sluggos, I've been fishing a lot of like big sluggos, and that has been fishing really well as well. And which is fine. I don't like fishing with sluggos, but if that's what's happening, then I will make an exception to fish with sluggos if I need to. And I needed to this spring. So I was pretty much basing a lot of my fishing off of almost completely new experience. And this spring / early summer here. And now that the spring fishing is over for us on Cape Ann, we didn't kill it. A few guys did fairly well. But I really have to say the rocks didn't disappoint. They did what they always do, is they produce those bigger bass than they get in the estuaries. And you know, I'm not saying that there aren't big bass in the estuaries this time of year, or in like early, well, I guess around the new moon, but I am saying that there are bigger bass off the rocks. And I don't care if you're catching 40-inch bass in the estuaries, there's probably going to be some 40-pound bass off the rocks at that time. Maybe not as early as May, but you're going to be seeing those big bass on the rocks pretty much as early as you're going to be seeing them in the estuaries. Now, am I going to be fishing in the estuaries and the rivers next spring? For sure, that's going to be the way I'm going after it. I think that I learned my lesson this spring, and really trying to follow those smaller bait profiles just wasn't it this spring. So I'm gonna go after those bigger bait profiles like the herring, and I'm gonna really try to, and we had bunker really early too. And that's the other thing, the amount of bunker that's around right now is really dictating the bite. So the bite's been really bunker heavy this spring. So if big top waters is kind of what I was thinking early, and then it just wasn't it. Again, as I was saying, the big top waters just weren't it. And then, so I've been trying to like figure my life out, because I feel like most of my spring fishing is very spook based fishing. I fish a lot of spooks early in the spring, and 100% of the time am I fishing a Pumbaa Plug Magnum Walker in the spring. Maybe just the Walker sometimes, but 100% of the time I'm throwing the Magnum. And the reason for that is it's a big plug, and it produces the biggest bites, and it is the best topwater spook I've ever fished, ever. And that's not debated. I fished docks, it's just better than all of them because it doesn't dive under the water. And I really, really like the fact that it does not dive under the water. That's huge for me. That's like one of the biggest things that I always focus on, is making sure that when I have a big bass chasing my bait, that I don't have to deal with it diving under the water at the most important critical time when the bass is swirling on my plug and screw everything up. Because I've said that again multiple times, like that's the worst thing that you can have happen to you when you're fishing with big spooks, is you can have them dive under the water. You really, really don't want that to happen. You just want those. You just want the. You just want the bigger. What was I saying? Wow, I just lost my train of thought. Yeah, you don't want the big spooks to dive under the water, because that's just gonna show the fish what it is, and they're not gonna want to eat it. And that's like my big spring thing. Like I really want to be throwing plugs that look like big baits. And it's if the bass are in the estuaries on the herring, they're gonna be big. If the bass are in the rivers on the herring, they're gonna be big fish. But they're not gonna be quite as big as I think the bass that are gonna be on the rocks this time of year. It's just how it goes. I think, at least, how it goes for this time of year. I think that it's definitely. I think that you should definitely be fishing. You should definitely be fishing the biggest baits, like trying to target the bass that are feeding on the biggest baits in your area at that time of the spring. Like that's where you're going to be finding the biggest fish, obviously, because that's the biggest bait. But then even more so than that, it's just going to be the easiest thing to mimic and get those finicky fish to actually feed on. And then going into the summer, which we are just starting to break into right now, you really want to be targeting those lazy fish. That's what we're doing this time of year, is we have these big lazy bass, and we need to try to get their attention with large baits. So that's why rig deals work so well in the summer, because they just seem to get those finicky bass to feed, and they have that action that even a live eel doesn't have, where you can really implement it at even different depths, and that can be very, very productive depending on the time of year and the water temps and water clarity. I was fishing earlier one of the bigger bass I got early this spring. I was fishing and the water was super dirty, and the bass were really finicky, and I was trying to figure out how I could get these bass to eat in about 4 feet of clear, clean water, and it just was not happening. They were not there. I was getting seaweed on it. They weren't hitting what I wanted them to. I got a few rambunctious schoolies on little plugs, but then after that, I was really not getting what I was hoping for, and until I threw on the rig deal, and the rig deal did the work for me. I was able to get the biggest bass in that area, which was a high 30-incher, and I felt pretty good about it. To be able to pull a bass out of that area that was really just tough fishing conditions, and it made me feel that doing this nasty thing of rigging an eel is worth it, because you can fish an eel in that, but the eel is going to go right for that seaweed to hide, and you don't want that. You want to be able to cast where you want to be able to cast into that cleaner water, and it really paid off for me. And now that's all I want to do is fish rigged eels, because I think that they can get those bigger bites, but they can more specifically do exactly what you want, and you know exactly what they're doing, and you can be a little bit more connected to them. It's kind of the best of both worlds. You get that eatability of a big juicy eel, but at the same time you also get the like workability of a plug. You get to this, or the sensitivity, more like it. You get the sensitivity of a plug to be able to actually fish a plug. And this is when we're getting to that first real bite of summer, where I think the bass are big and they only want big prey. That's really what I've always kind of gathered. They're hunting for big prey. They don't want to waste their time on anything small and anything not worth it. So you got to be fishing big stuff this time of year. That's what I think is one of the most important things to do, is fish big items, big prey items for them. Fish, if they're on bunker, fish big bunker looking plugs. And if perfect case scenario, you're going to be fishing with large eels, either live or rigged. And in this case, I'm going to be fishing with rigged eels. And then when we get closer to the moon phase, then I'm going to be breaking out the live ones, and then I'm going to be fishing out the live eels. And the live eels obviously tend to do better unless it's super seaweedy. But live eels always do better than rigged eels. It is what it is. I guess in rare forms, when it's super seaweedy, yeah, you probably could do better on a riggy, but in most scenarios, you're going to be pretty much targeting those bigger bass, and you're going to be able to do it much better and much more controlled on the rig deal than you are on really you'll be able to do it better on the live eel, because the live eel is a live bait, and it's easier to trick up a big old experienced bass with live bait than it is with a rigged eel if you don't rig it beautifully. And right now we're rigging it absolutely perfectly, so we should be able to trick a big experienced fish into eating it. Did I not get that through its head? Shoot. No, that one's good. It's this one that I think, man, I'm screwing everything up. I've never actually screwed up like this that badly on rigging eels. I lost my thing. I lost came out of the tiny little slit of the open-eyed hooks. Came out of the tiniest of little slits. Come on, go through. There we go. Okay, we're good. We're in it to win it. Anyway, but the live eels fishing has really been the most productive. I don't care what you're doing, you're fishing your live eels. Obviously, live eels always produce, and they've been producing for me this spring. And you can't knock them, they always produce big fish, always. And that's just the nature of the beast, I guess. If you're lucky enough to be able to buy a bunch of live eels every moon phase, you're gonna do really, really well, because the fishing just always seems to be the best with live eels. Now, what I do, and what I think saves a lot of money, is you fish your live eels, and then when your eel dies, you just repurpose it and you rig it like I'm doing. I fished all of these eels. All these eels have caught fish for me. Literally, every single one of these eels that I'm rigging, or I am going to be rigging, has caught at least one bass for me. And even one of them in here has caught me a 40-inch bass. So that means that, you know, I'm getting, not only am I catching a 148 or 40-inch bass on the plug, but on the eel, I'm also, you know, could potentially catch 10 40-inch bass on the eel, on this exact same eel, if it holds up to the elements, which most of the time it does. Is everything good here? We're going one more wrap around this. Okay. Yeah, and you know, rigging eels is a long, slow process. It always is. It always will be. And I've changed my ways from that. There's an OG podcast where I talk about fishing rigged and live eels, and I do it differently now. You know, I feel like my tactics have changed, and even in a short time as one season, I do certain things similar, but I've changed it up a little bit this year, and I've been fishing them more this year too. So, you know, I made them a little bit more, or a little bit easier to do, and a little bit more durable. So it doesn't take like an hour to rig them now. It takes like 30 minutes to rig them. It's still a long time, but I feel like this is the best of both worlds. Come on. And yeah, but you know, I've caught, you know, what is the most? Probably 15 to 20 fish on the same eel. So yeah, they don't really fall apart. If you can secure the hook well, they don't tend to fall apart that much. And that's a really good thing, because that means you can catch a lot of big fish on the same rig deal if you need to. If you're on a good bite, you don't have to ever spend time switching out your eel. Just unhook the fish and toss them back in the water, and you're on to the next one, you know? If you're on a good bite, you don't have to mess around with having to like dig around, grab an eel, have it slide out of your hand, lose it, you know? Because what? It's like $2 an eel sometimes, so it's not cheap to be fishing eels. But if you can do what I'm doing right here, which is just repurposing eels that I've previously fished with, it becomes slightly more affordable to buy eels pretty often, because then you're really getting many plugs and many fish on eels, and that tends to. And the thing is, like, if I would never do this if I didn't catch fish on it. Like, who wants to be, you know, rigging this nasty eel if you're not catching bass with it? And in the summer, especially the early summer, they just work, you know? I don't know what to tell you about, like they just catch fish, and they consistently catch fish. And I feel like a lot of people that I know don't do this. I know very few people that rig eels, and to those people I say, you're missing out. And you're not only missing out, you're losing money, because you can save a lot of money rigging eels, and that's the important thing. And then if your eel starts to fall apart, cut the hook out of it, and you're on to the next one, you know? Easy as that. You can repurpose the hooks sometimes, and it's all good, you know? You can fish the same hooks a bunch, and if you lose it, it's like, I don't know, a few bucks for the hooks and the hardware. But other than that, it's not like you're losing a plug either. You're just losing a little eel. So it's not as bad. Dang, son, what is this? Hard gill plate or something. There you go, got it through. Yeah. And the more that I've dealt with, the more I've targeted large bass, the more I've seen, like, you're missing out. If you're not fishing rigged eels or live eels, I don't know what you're doing, because that's the only way to go. Otherwise, it's really just, you know, it's a chance. It's just it's just a personal goal at that point, in my opinion. Yeah, there's certain scenarios where you can get a lot of big bass on plugs, but you can generally get more big fish and bigger fish on eels. And yeah, and as I said, at the point that you're just strictly fishing plugs, that's because it's like a personal thing at that point. If you really want to target and get those big fish, you have to fish eels, and you got to rig them too, because you don't even if they die, their value is not gone yet. You still have that a little bit of value left in the eel, and sometimes a lot of value left. And the more I fish these, I've rarely hooked bass on the tail hook. They almost always go after that front hook. Now that I say this, I'm gonna hook a big bass and it's just gonna break me off on the tail hook. But I've actually so far never hooked one on the tail hook. I'm a little bit scared to hook a really big fish on the tail hook. If I hook a really big fish, until I know what hook it's hooked by, I might, if I can get it out of the danger zone, I'm loosening up on my drag. And I'm just gonna baby it in, because I'm a little bit scared, because you can't really tie that good of a knot to the eye of the hook. And other than really the rigging floss, holding it in place, it's pretty much a game of chance that it's gonna stay on good or not. And that's not a game that I really want to gamble with, especially when you're fishing with a plug or with something that's as notorious as, eels, as I've been talking about. And I haven't explored fishing with eel skin plugs yet. I'm hoping that I can get some eel skin plug prototypes from Pumbaa Plugs soon, and put them on some metal lips, and I'm gonna put them on some needlefish and see what I can do. See if I can get on some nicer fish, because I've never actually done that. And I think that's another good way that you can improve your casting distance and give it a little bit more lively action as well, but still have that catchability of an eel. And that's the important thing, because the bass love eating eels. So yeah, and then I'm gonna go into, so last moon phase, I did a lot of fishing with plugs. I didn't really get into eeling that moon phase at all. I didn't end up really catching much other than a few schoolies. That was really it. That moon phase, maybe a few high, like keepers to low 30-inch bass, but I was really not getting anything to write home about by any sense during this moon phase last year. And I'm hoping to change that this season in a big way. I'm hoping to make this one of my better moon phases. And who knows if it's gonna be, I'm not actually that confident that it's gonna be one of the better moon phases, but all I can do is apply the knowledge and what I've learned over the past year to this real moon phase. And I feel like the biggest leaps and bounds that I've made in targeting larger bass has been the past few years. And you learn so much about certain areas, and fishing off the rocks has been just so interesting through the past year or two. So I am super excited to see what happens, because this is one that if I can get this one dialed in this moon, then really I have that May full and new moon. Well, I got the new moon dialed in actually for May, but I have the May full moon that I want to kind of get good, and I have the June, all the moon phases in June that I feel pretty confident about, did well. And yeah, so I have those moon phases to start to really dial in a little bit more. But and this is one of them. The other two I feel pretty confident about, but we'll see. Who knows? Every year's different, and maybe this moon phase will be good, and the next one that was productive last year is not going to be as good. You really never know. It really is year dependent, I found, and even in the springtime. But you can kind of find areas that tend to produce well in different times of years. And you can never really predict the weather that you're going to have or the bait you're going to have at certain times of years. And that's one of the more important things, is that weather. And if you have really good weather, you're going to have really good fishing. And if you have really bad weather, then that's going to make it a lot tougher to get onto bigger fish. If it's super flat, calm, and really there's not a lot of like disturbance on the weather front going, then it's going to be a lot more difficult, especially off the rocks, to end up hooking into some bigger fish. It's going to be a lot trickier to trick the bigger fish into getting into eating. I don't care what you're throwing. Even if you're throwing a live eel, it's going to be a lot trickier. Where if it's really turbulent and really rocking out there with waves and wind and everything, you throw an eel in there, the bass doesn't have much time to see what it is. It just pipes it, and then you're off to the races on that. And so, I mean, it's so, I've always found that it is always very year dependent, weather dependent, so everything's a variable, right? And the more that you narrow them down, the better. And the more time that you put into, working on how to minimize the amount of variables, or at least control the amount of variables that you can, the better off you're going to be in the long run. And I feel like last year I really figured out how to minimize as many variables as possible, or surprise variables rather. It's just really, if you get surprised by something, that's when stuff, doesn't go the way you want it, and then it gets kind of discouraging if you aren't catching big fish. But the more I've fished, the more I've learned is you really got to just not spend an overly, you can't spend too much time trying to you can't spend too much time catching no fish. If you're spending too much time not catching fish, then you need to change your tactics. And I did that last year, and it changed my whole season. I went from not really catching a lot of bass myself personally to doing a few changes, and then all of a sudden it was, gong show, big bass, craziness. And I'm trying to really pattern down what these fish are doing, how they're reacting to certain things. And if you find something that works, really try to pursue that, stick with it, and don't mess around with too much extra stuff other than that, because if you're messing around with too much stuff, you're gonna overcomplicate your life, and it's just gonna be miserable, because you're gonna do stupid things, you're gonna try things that are not gonna work, and you're gonna waste time, and more importantly, time that you could end up hooking into really, really big fish. And that is the one thing that I've been trying my best to avoid, is wasting my own time on stuff, on personal goals. This season, I really want to just catch big fish, and like I did the season before, and do that as many times until I get bored of catching giant fish. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So who knows what's going to happen. And then, you can always start, I want to catch a big bass on a fly rod. Oh, I want to do this, that. That stuff is all fun and good, but I just think that definitely for me, at least for the foreseeable future, I'm going to be pursuing these big bass in the best way I can, really, targeting them as best that I can, and trying to get the biggest fish I can out of every moon, every good tide and good wind direction, every good storm that moves through. If we can get a good storm to move through and coincide with a moon phase, we're going to be sitting pretty again. We had one of those last October, and it was magical. It was really, really magical fishing. That was some of those days. I had ridiculous amount of 30-pound bass. It was just stupid fishing, and that's what I'm hoping for later in the season. But right now, if I can get these moon phases dialed in and get even a few 40-inch bass starting to really crunch my baits, I'm going to be feeling good about myself and feeling good about where I'm standing. I would love to pull at least one big bass this moon phase, and I hope if I can pull one bass over 40 inches this moon phase, I'll be really, really stoked. And hopefully I can do that tonight, because this is day one really where I feel like I can I can catch a big bass. And when this is out, I'm gonna be fishing. Literally, I'm having my camera guy / editor at Striggy Films post this podcast as I'm fishing tonight. And yeah, look, there we go, finished an eel. That's one riggy done. So yeah, it takes a while to rig an eel well, but that bad boy right here, this is like, if I had to say like, I want the perfect size rig deal, this is like the perfect size rig deal. It's not ridiculously big to where it's overpowering my gear, and it's not super small to where the bigger fish are just gonna ignore it. It's gonna get crushed. If there's a 40-inch bass and it sees this thing freaking swimming like beautifully through the water, it's just gonna pipe it. It's gonna swallow this whole thing, and it's gonna be amazing. Okay, I'm gonna take a little break from rigging eels, and I guess I'm gonna talk a little bit about my gear that I'm gonna be fishing with this for this moon phase. And the rod, the reel, the line, the leader material, and any terminal tackle I have as well. So for tonight at least, and this will all vary depending on what I'm doing every night. Some nights I'm gonna be using plugs. Some nights I'm gonna be using live eels. Some nights I'm gonna be using rigged eels. For a lot of the plug fishing I'm gonna be doing, I have the Canal Series Carbon Surf, and all of you people that fish Cape Ann are gonna be like, this is way too big for you. And then I'm gonna say to you, this is barely big enough. And that's the thing, like, I fish super differently than a lot of people, and that's why I think that I'm productive in my own way that I fish. And I fish with big bait all the time. Not like bait, like chunkin' bait. I'm talking about big eels, big rigged eels, big plugs. I'm throwing, plugs that are easily 8 ounces. Fishing rigged eels that can be up to 2 pounds. And that's not ounces, that's pounds. And that's the thing, like, I'm throwing big, heavy gear because I know that I need to be able to horse a big fish out of boulders. And that's that. You want to horse a big bass out of the rocks, get them away from that bad structure, and you need a rod with backbone to do it. And the good thing about this is the Carbon Surf is it is a affordable rod that has good backbone, and it's 70-30 split, I believe, and right? Wow, I probably sound like an idiot. Wow, I sound like an idiot there. Anyway, it's a rod that is it's a 2-piece rod, but the good part about this rod is, I'm gonna redact everything I just said. The good part about this rod is, it is a 2-piece rod, but it has the rods that have the 1-piece feel to them. And I fish the St. Croix rods, and St. Croix rods have that, feel to them of a 1-piece rod, and that's what I like. And this is a big boy rod. This rod you can go bottom bounce the canal on this thing. But then I'm fishing this in shallow water with, minimal, it has good current, but mostly just big surf. And I'm throwing heavy stuff, and I need to get it out there into this like underwater reef areas. You're swimming out to them, you're fishing these reefs, and you want to fish with big eels, big rigged eels, live eels, and you have the waves. I mean, this is like real, like if you picture like real like heavy duty surf casting where you're on the rocks, you're getting hit off rocks, you're getting smashed in the face by waves, this is it, this is the way it goes. And the cool thing is we're able to document a lot of this for the Striped Bass Hunt Show, and I can't wait for you guys to see the Striped Bass Hunt Show coming out July 18th is the first episode, or the second episode, but the first episode that's going to be in the revolving schedule. So every other week that the episodes are going to be going out until sometime in November, I believe. But these Okay, so I'll go to my reel now. I'm fishing a Van Staal VSX 275, and I'm fishing with 80-pound Max Quattro braid. Weird thing about the braid, so I've been suggesting this braid to people, and I've had pretty much no problem with it. And then I have one reel that every single time I go, I spooled it with 30-pound Max Quattro braid, and every single time I fish with it, it has gotten wind knot every single time without fail, sometimes even more than once. And it's not like I'm doing anything crazy, you know. I fish the same way with all my gear, but I'm getting wind knots every single time I fish. And the line must be bad, you know. It's so weird because I have it on the same line on all of my rods, and I've had no wind knots on any of my other rods. It's just that one rod and reel that that combo for some reason is just a wind knot machine, and I've been dealing with that, and it's been very annoying for me. But I've been fishing with the Carbon Surf, the Lemglass Carbon Surf Canal Series with, you know, a big reel and heavy line, and I'm fishing it to 80 to 60 pound leaders. And I think I want to go 60 tonight, not to go crazy heavy. I don't know why. I just don't think I'm gonna get overpowered in this spot, or at least there's not really a place for the bass to wrap me around things, unless they get me way out at the end of my cast, which, you know, could happen. But I don't have any spot in this area that I feel like I'm worried about them really taking me around a rock. But if they are, loosen up on my drag, have the bass scream some line for a little bit. They'll hopefully, if my hooks stay pinned, which these have beefy barbs, and they should stay pinned on the bass. And speaking of which, I hooked my thumb pretty good the other day, but I was using barbless treble hooks, so it just came right out, no problem. And that's the thing. I've been saying a lot, you know, barbless hooks, better for the fish and also better for you. And they're definitely better for you, because that could have been a hospital mission right there. I went through the back side of my thumb and out right by the side of my fingernail. And I was able to just unthread that, no problem, just a little blood. And yeah, it's just like getting a thorn stuck in your hand. It's not really that big of a deal, but if it had a barb on it, it would have sucked. It really would have sucked, because it wasn't a big enough, it was like a size 2 VMC treble hook, and it wouldn't have been big enough to get out. And the thing is, I try to be very safe when I'm handling my fish, and this was a little schoolie and was hooked in the side of the mouth with a plug, and I lipped the bass, and it shook, and the hook that was in the face of the bass, the way the bass shook, it like shook enough that it slid the hook that was in its face through my finger, and I was able to just pop it out. It was not that big a deal, but I was like, it just was annoying. Anyway, and I've been fishing really heavy drag in general, but I'm probably not gonna go crazy tonight, just enough that I'm not getting any drag slip, which is important to me. If I'm not getting any drag slip, if you get drag slip, you're screwed right from the get-go, because the bass will shake it most of the time, unless you have some really crazy sharp hooks. And these are so beefy that you really need to get it. Once the bass eats it, I need to set it a few more times, make sure that bass is thoroughly hooked in the face, and then let him go off to the races. And hopefully I'm in it to win it. I'm getting that crazy huge runs, and you're the ones that you're just like, holy crap, holding on for dear life. That's what I really am craving, that craziness. And hopefully it happens. I really hope that I can get onto a bass that does it for me this moon phase. I really want to get one of those. I want to get 30+ pound bass, really, is what I want to get. One of those that's just a horse, just gets into its head into the current, and it just digs. And that's what I'm really hoping for. I guess I'm gonna get into some questions here, because I put a poll, I put a question thing on my Instagram, and I will be able. So because I knew I was gonna do this podcast, I hadn't done this in a while, and I know we had a lot of listeners. Again, you'd have to be OOG to have. You have to be a real OG podcast listener to have seen the times that I was asking for questions. Basserman plugs, eels, or both. Oh, so, okay. Backstory to this. On my Instagram, I have a picture of a bass that I was fishing. And this is gonna, just because I saw some of the other questions, and I know that I'm holding a bass, okay? And some of the questions have to do with that fish in general. So I'm holding up a nice fish. It's kind of a blurry phone photo, but it was a nice, I think that was like a 36-pound bass was what it was. So it was a big fish. I want to say it was in that high 30-pound range, and it was like probably 43, between like 45 and 43 inches. I don't think I measured. I think I just weighed it. I don't know. I forget. It was a while ago. Okay. Plugs, eels, or both. Do you ever use topwater at night other than a needle? Okay. So obviously that I use eels now. If you're listening to this podcast, I use eels like crazy. I also will use plugs, but again, as I said in one point in this podcast, if you really want to target that trophy bass, you need to be fishing with plugs, or you need to be fishing with plugs. You need to be fishing with eels in some aspect, whether that be a live eel, a rigged eel, or a eel skin plug. That's what, if you want to get a trophy, that's what you're going to be fishing with. If you want to be able to get a bunch of bass and maybe get a bass that's, in that high caliber range, you can fish with plugs, and you'll probably be able to pull that off if there's a big fish in that area. It's just that you're much more likely to do it on a live rigged or eel skin plug. And that's just my personal opinion, but I have done extraordinarily well. And there are times where the bass are so turned on, the bite is ridiculous, and you can't even hardly put your plug in the water without a bass eating it, that there'd be no point to throw an eel, because it would just be slowing you down. And I had a few bites like that in October, and those are the bites where I'd say strictly going plugs. But if I'm targeting a trophy bass, especially this summer, I'm gonna be throwing big eels, and more specifically live ones. But if I don't have live eels, I'm gonna be throwing rigged eels. And then as far as topwater plugs go, I don't like to fish the usual pencil poppers, chugging topwaters, or even spooks at night. I don't even go that far. I don't know. I just don't think the bass track that stuff as well at night. I've not really fished them, to be quite frank. I haven't really even attempted to fish them. I just don't think they track as well. I have a story that I've told a few times, but I'll tell it again because it really emphasizes this and really blows up my theory here. But I was fishing with a darter at night, and I thought it was super seaweedy that night, and I thought I had seaweed on my darter, and I reel it really quick, and I'm skipping it across the surface of the water, and I have actually the fish in this picture jump out of the water 3 times and then crush the darter. So that just shows you that, that thing was skipping along the surface. The bass was falling in under the water, but then when I started to reel it really quick and it was skipping on the surface, that fish was like, hold up. And it went after it, full needed to eat this fish, because it probably thought that my darter was a bait fish trying to jump away from it. And it was crazy to watch this bass chase it down and crush it. And if you've ever seen a bait fish at night, they'll tend to jump if they jump. They'll tend to jump a few times and then they'll stop moving. And that's what I did. I reeled it really fast. The thing skipped across the surface, probably 5-6 feet. The bass jumped out of the water, literally full high 30-pound bass leaping out of the water. It was a full moon, so I could see everything happening. It was leaping out of the water, and then it crushes it on the surface. And that was the sickest thing I've ever seen. At night, one of the sickest things I've ever seen as far as bass fishing goes at night. And then the other thing that I do fish a lot at night is Danny plugs. Danny plugs are, surface to subsurface lures, depending on what you want to do that day or what you're trying to cover, that profile you're trying to cover. And I fish a lot of Danny plugs at night. And so that's a surface plug. And yeah, so I guess, yes, I do fish a few surface plugs at night, but it's very narrowed to those specific ones. night or morning, and what colors? And okay, I obviously like fishing at night, and I don't like waking up super early to fish. If I can, I'll just stay up and then fish. So really, I prefer night fishing. Although if you can get on a good topwater bite, you can get on a good topwater bite in the early morning. In early summer, pencil popping or using big spooks at like 4, 5 in the morning, even 3. You know, it gets bright early during the summer. So if you can use big, topwater plugs, and I emphasize big, I'm talking about big, huge pencils, huge spooks. You throw in those things early in the morning, you can get that, that bigger bass. If you really want to get your like personal best bass in topwater, or at least see a big fish go up to the surface, that's when I would really start to try to target those. And this is more specifically off of the rocks. I know that there's some areas that you can fish on the same beaches that produce big fish during the summer, but nothing like off the rocks when it's getting hot. And what colors? I'm a huge, because I like mimicking bait. So whatever bait's in the water is what I'm gonna be trying to target the best. If I need to, I'm gonna be fishing with, I mostly try to mimic bunker. Bunker is probably my favorite bait to mimic. I think it just always works for me. And I've done a lot of it. I mimic bunker all the time with most of the plugs I use. I'll mess with yellow over white or white. And I'll go mackerel, I'll go squid if the squid are around. I'll mess around with like realistic colors a lot. And that's what I really mess with. Okay, next question. Do you think chartreuse matters on full moon nights? I've caught some very big bass on chartreuse darters during full moons. But I don't know if it necessarily matters color-wise. I just think it's profile. Really, profile is what is, in my opinion, one of the more important aspects of mimicking bait. Color is always a good one, but I would almost say more realistic colors. Otherwise, I don't think color matters necessarily that much, other than black black and purple, or black or purple and blue, or like those colors, and like white. And those are like on those aspects of the spectrum. I like to fish darker colors for new moons and lighter colors for full moons generally. But you can go vice versa. It doesn't really matter. It depends on what you're doing and where you're fishing. If you're fishing like back bay stuff, really like quiet, like calm fishing at night, I would say go darker, honestly, even so that when the bass is looking up at the surface, for say you're fishing on the surface, if the bass is looking up and it sees something dark, it's gonna really clearly see that with it being lighter out. But I don't think it really matters, honestly. Colors don't really matter to me. Chartreuse has been productive for me, especially when there's bunker around. I think that just anything from green to white is gonna, even black and purple, like that all mimics bunker. But again, it's so profile based. It's really profile based. Eels ? Eels are, they are what they are. And I've talked a lot about eels, and I can talk more about eels. I can talk about eels for years, and I've talked to many guys about eels. But really, the most important thing is monster hunting, going for that PB. You're fishing with eels, no question to ask. That's what, if I'm giving you one thing to do, fish with an eel. Now, obviously, it's better to fish with eels at night, but if you really want to get that trophy, go with an eel. Foggy day too, eels are. Next question, slinging eels with lots of question marks. Obviously, I love this. I love that you guys are asking me questions about eels, because here's the thing, like I always think I'm being really redundant when I'm talking about eels, because I just preach them. I work with Puma plugs, and yet I'm still preaching eels, because I know that eels are by far the most productive big bass baits, period, end of story. And there's so many different ways you can fish them. live rigged, eel skin, and it's unfathomable the amount. And people even put like the tails of eels on bucktails as bucktail teasers and stuff like that. Like, you can do so much with an eel. You can even hook a live eel onto your bucktail. I've seen guys do that in jetties if they're trying to get it down deeper. There's so many things that you can do with an eel to get big bass, and it's all about experimentation and being able to, work with it. And yeah, it's much more difficult to end up working with eels because they're nasty creatures. They're pretty expensive too, and they're sometimes can be super finicky. They can be really difficult to deal with. And then new regulations with these circle hooks, which is like, I've seen 3 bass get gut hooked by circle hooks this year. And actually not my fish. I've not gut hooked a bass with a circle hook yet. But that just shows you like it doesn't matter. And these are not big fish. These are mid 20-inch bass getting gut hooked. They're swallowing it. People don't know how to use these circle hooks. Nobody was really, there were guys that are using circle hooks, but the people that don't really understand how to use circle hooks or pull them out of fish's mouths multiple times are like feeding them too long. And that's the problem. Like, it's such a happy medium and it just doesn't really do anything for anyone. You're still gut hooking. I've seen as many bass gut hooked this season as I did last season. I don't think it matters, the new regulations with the circle hooks. That's just my opinion on them so far, is just what I've seen. I've seen bass with them in them more than I've ever seen in years past. I've even seen bass with big, like 8/0 J hooks in them, and I've done some surgery, gotten them out. But yeah, it's just it's just not good, It's just been not good. Okay. Do you ever fish at night with live eels during the full moon? Wow. I guess we got a lot of people loving the eel question today. And I'm glad that you guys are, because I love talking about eels. Yes. That's it, actually. Okay, thank you everyone who answered. Oh, I forgot. I'm so bad at reading, so I'm just not gonna even try to read you guys' names. Sorry about I just don't want to botch your names here on Instagram and look like an idiot, like I've already done a few times this podcast. Anyway, we can do a little bit more here. I was thinking about, I rigged 1 eel on this podcast. I thought I was gonna be able to rig some more, but I just felt like I was losing my train of thought too much. So I was like, you know what? Not gonna mess with it. Not gonna really I'm not gonna mess with rigging another eel, because I'm gonna keep losing my train of thought, and you guys are gonna be losing interest because I'm trying to multitask and talk about something intelligently, and I have not been able to because I'm distracted, messing up with the rod sizes. It's a whole thing. And yeah, but I do have to say I'm pretty happy about how I have a whole bucket of eels to do. It's gonna take me years to rig all these eels, but it's gonna be worth it when it's done. And I'm using you guys as a way to get me through the next few hours of me waiting to go out and fish the high tide tonight. I'm gonna fish the high tide, slack high, maybe the other side a little bit. And then as it gets closer to low tide, we're gonna switch things up. I'm gonna go fish a completely different area. And go fish that hard, because I feel like that's gonna produce for me. And it did last year later in the season. So who knows, weather-wise, we just got some rain, so the fishing topwater bite was really hot. I had the best topwater bite I've had all season, and that was a lot of fun. And I just really, really enjoyed that. And so I'm super stoked that the bass are really starting to get more aggressive with this summer, and because they were being a little bit of, not very aggressive fish this year. They're really not that angry like they were the year before. I felt that, and I don't know, maybe it's just every year you feel you only remember the best parts of the season. You're not really remembering how awful it was at times, which I know it was. I had some struggles, I had some grinds, and I hope that I don't have, I hope I catch big fish this season. Here's the thing. I'm not anything special. If my bites don't work for me this season, I'm gonna have to really replay and rethink some stuff. Catching a 40-inch bass is a good thing to do. I mean, that's not the easiest thing to do, especially from shore. But at the same time, you know, that could be it for the season. I could get one bass over 40 inches this year. The fishery's not what it can be, what it should be, and it's not. And I've talked to a lot of guys that are like, God, this spring was awful, and the fishing is worse than it was last year. I don't really know what to say, because I've heard, you know, everybody that's in New York, New Jersey have had legendary seasons so far. Who knows about this fall? You never know about the fall. It could be really good, really bad, blitzes, no blitzes. There's just so many variables. You have huge storms, you could have no storms. The bass could be here until almost December, or they could leave in November. And you just really never know. I think one of the most extraordinary things I ever witnessed was striped bass blitzing the week before Thanksgiving in 2013 on Cape Ann. That was the most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed. I forget if it was a warm spring or warm fall, but yeah, because normally we lose them right around November. I haven't caught a bass in Cape Ann past what would it be? It wouldn't be, yeah, I think it would be literally the day before November 1st would be the last time I ever caught a fish. And the funny thing was, my last bass of the season last year was on Cape Ann, and it was a 29-inch bass on a Pumbaa plug, big eye, pencil popper. And, you know, a little mackerel imitation, 29-inch bass, super clear water. Last bass of the season, drag pull, the whole bit. Super nice little guy, light tackle. Loved it, you know, enjoyed it. It was a really great last bass of the season. And I feel like this spring went so quick with the virus and everything that like I'm enjoying fishing even for schoolies so much that like I haven't really focused on targeting large bass yet this season like I did last year. Well, like I did last year this time. Like I did more in the spring, but then once I got my first 40 of the year, I've been like, you know what, screw it. I'm gonna go after and have some fun. And you know what I think that is because I really, I didn't have fun with the schoolies and get my fix of catching bass all spring. I didn't even target lots of little bass. It was just not my thing. You know, I was like, I'm going after big fish and that's it. And I never really got my fix of little bass. And I was fishing the biggest gear I could really early. And I was just like, no, not going after schoolies. I need that first big fish of the season. And then I got 2 back to back in a week. And, you know, I was good with that. You know, I felt fulfilled for a while as far as I felt like I did the best I could, and I feel really awesome. Like I feel confident and I feel good right now. And as the season's progressed, the bait's been weird, the bass have been even stranger, but I feel like stuff's starting to really start to turn on right now. The bass have been really bad. It's been horrible fishing, by the way. Like I've talked to a lot of people, and other than like select few people, I'd say that 1%, there's 1% of people that are doing decent, but mostly at night and mostly at like 2, 3 in the morning, like grinding all night long, fishing with eels. And those are the guys that are like getting a few 40-inch bass here and there and some high 30s and getting on these like sneaky little bites. I'm not about that life, you know. Maybe later when I get crazy about it, I'll go out and be like fishing hours upon hours upon hours, but I'm all about those little missions, little sends to get those bass. I don't like spending over 6 hours fishing. That's my max really for me. If I'm spending 6 hours in one go fishing, unless I'm like catching them every cast, like I can't go 6 hours without catching a fish. Like that's never gonna happen. I don't care if I have a 48-inch bass at the end of well, if I had a 48-inch bass, I'd probably do it. But you know, you get what I'm saying. Like I don't, like it would have to take a lot. It would have to take a guarantee of a 48-inch bass to get me fishing 6 hours without catching anything. I'll fish 6 hours and catch a bunch of schoolies. I'll fish 6 hours and catch, you know, 6 bass over 30 inches every hour. or like catch one bass over 30 inches for 6 hours. That first time didn't make any sense. Yeah. And what else did I want to talk about? Oh, how I keep my eels. That was the other thing I wanted to talk about because I get a lot of questions about this. I keep my eels in a 10-gallon tank with a filter, like a 20-gallon filter or something like that on it. And I have them outside and I change the water every other day, and it's hose water, and I put a little chlorine / bad chemical stuff in it. I have like a whole bottle. It's like for koi ponds, and I just like dump a little in there. Not that they would ever die because of chlorine. You could put them in rubbing alcohol and they'd probably survive for months. It's so weird. If they have moving water, you're good. I'm telling you right now, if you have a bag of eels, don't set them in a tide pool without moving water because they'll die instantly. And it's so weird. They're so weird. They would rather be, you dip them in the water, you have them in a mesh bag, dip them in the water, and let them chill. This is something, have I never talked about this? Okay, I gotta talk about this. Okay, if you're fishing with eels, this is the way you go. I don't have it in here. So I have a ODM surf fishing belt. Best surf, I think it's the best surf fishing belt out there for sure. And I have a little clip, like a carabiner clip on it. And I take a little laundry bag that's about this big, and I tie a knot in the bottom of it to make it smaller. And I fill it with my eels that I'm taking out that night, close it down, put it on my little carabiner clip, and I carry it. Now, don't let it whack against you because you'll just injure the eels. The whole point of having live eels is to have live eels. And then I walk out to where I'm fishing, and as soon as I get to the water, I dip them in the salt water, get them a little bit moist. If it's really windy or really hot, every so often dip them in the water, get them a little moist. They would rather go dry though than be sat in warmer tide pool water. Then they'll die like that. And you just can't have that happening. So I dip them in the water and keep them out in the air and whatever. They're totally chill, and they're lively as anything when you get them out of that bag. And this is the other thing. Never whack an eel on a rock before you fish it, because the whole point of having a live eel is to have a live eel. The eel needs to be live, and that's final, really. That's all I care about. I want my eel to be alive, and because that eel going like this in the water is sending out these vibrations in the water that these bass are so keyed in on that they will be at that thing instantly. They'll be there and they'll be eating it. So you want that, if there's a big fish around, you want that eel to be lively. If it's dead and it's like in the water and it's not really moving, that you can still catch a big fish, but then the eel's gonna die in like 15 seconds and then you're done. And then you have a dead eel, and then you're just reeling a dead eel in, and it doesn't have the action and the weight of these hooks to keep it down perfectly set in the water. And you can, this beautiful action that this will have once this is in the water. It won't have that action. It will just be like kind of going through the water. And you can catch a bass on it. A bass will smack that, and you can get a big bass on that. It's just not what I would say is productive. Now, this is gonna look as lively as the eels are gonna look when they first get out of the package, when they first get out of your laundry bag. You hook them in, you throw them out there, they're gonna look like that in the water, except they'll be a little bit more frantic, but they'll look a little bit more natural like that. And the bass they'll think it's a live eel and they'll whack that, and all it takes is that whack that you'll hook into them. But I do have to say though, when you're fishing with rigged eels, they think it's a live eel, or they think it's live bait, because they eat it. So I was fishing with a rigged eel, and the bass ate it, and it crushed the eel and snapped the spine of the eel in half. Crushed it and probably ate it again. And then I hooked into him, and boom, had nice 35-inch bass like that. And and it's funny because I've also talked to people saying that bass sizes are going from 20s, like high 20s, nothing in the 30 size, and then 40 plus inches, which is really weird to me. But the good thing is, what was it, a week ago or maybe 2 weeks ago, we had a big push of bass through the Cape Cod Canal, which means that they're gonna be showing up on Cape Ann right about now, which means 40-pound bass are gonna be around, which means big things. That's the thing. Like, if you can get those bass that are going through the canal, that go through the canal, they're going to be here 2 weeks later. That first big migration push went through Cape Ann. A few select guys got some 40-inch bass. I was one of them. I was one of the fortunate people to do that. And then they went to Maine. They kind of chilled off of Maine for a little bit. And I know some guys that have been pretty smacking them consistent in Maine. I don't really mess with Maine that much, just because I don't like driving very far. If I have to drive over an hour, I'm gonna cry because I just can't do it. And then, and then they go Nova Scotia in that area, and they'll chill there for most of the summer. But the big fish tend to sit around us to Maine all summer long, and then we get them a little bit later. So really big things are slowly starting to start up again. So like, we went through that first big wave, big bass, and now we're getting into that second wave of fish that are gonna be pushing through. Those bass that were off of New York, New Jersey, and the guys in New York, New Jersey have been killing it, man. You guys have been killing it. And I love to see that the fishing is so good there, and I hope that we can get that a little bit later in the season, but maybe even now, maybe now's the time. I think that this year has potential to be the best year ever, just because of the bait that's around, but who knows what's gonna happen. It just really depends on the bunker and what they do. If the bunker is staying like miles offshore, it's gonna be tough. They're a little bit further offshore than they were the year before, although I'm gonna be fishing in some spots that have a huge population of bunkers. So who knows what's gonna happen as the season progresses with the bunker being the way that they are. Yeah, it's really weird. I mean, I think that the primary bait fish for most of the season is bunker where I'm at. And then maybe you'll get that here and there, you get those macks that come through and those big schools of mackerel. And then maybe you'll get a bluefish or two that will push on those. That's the other thing, the bluefish are around. I haven't seen any yet, but I've heard some stories of guys getting bluefish. So I'm excited to see if they make a good comeback. I've actually never got one from shore. I've got them from boat before, in kayaks. So it's just like, it's interesting because Cape Ann just doesn't have bluefish. It does, but they're small, and we haven't seen them in 8 years, something like that, something crazy like that. So yeah, and the reason this podcast might be a little bit longer is just because I'm trying to get through a chunk of hours, because I'm gonna go out right at about sunset, try to hit that, because sunset's probably 8:30, so probably I'm gonna end the podcast soon. I'm gonna go out. This is how this is gonna work, right? Okay. So, and if literally, okay, here's the deal. If I call this shot for shot right now, I'm gonna do a podcast clip and I'm gonna insert a photo of the fish that I catch. Anyway, so I'm gonna fish right now with these rig deals. With this one, I have one more in the fridge. So I'm gonna fish with that and with those two guys. This one's like maybe an inch or two smaller, but so I'll probably start with that one, to be honest. This is like perfect size, in my opinion. That's like perfect. And then I will go fish. Okay, I'm getting there. I get out on my rocks just after sunset, when the mosquitoes are at their worst. So bug net for sure. On Cape Ann, off the rocks from July to July 15th, 16th, that's like death mosquito like time, like off the rock. Like you can't even breathe sometimes. There's that. I have a video of there being like clouds of mosquitoes. I couldn't breathe through my nose. They're going up my nose. I had to run and I couldn't fish. So I'm in, it's hot and I'm gonna have to be wearing waders and storm jacket and maybe even gloves. Like it's gonna be a whole thing. I'm gonna have to wear my bug net over my head. And yeah, probably try not to die, get all the blood sucked out of me. And so I'm gonna get out to the rock. I'm gonna take 2 casts. First cast, I'm either gonna hook up on the 40 or the second cast, I'm gonna hook up on the 40. And then if that doesn't happen, I'm gonna fish. I'm gonna get maybe a schoolie or two early, and then it's gonna be a lull for like an hour. And then around 10 or 11 o'clock, I'm gonna hook a 40. And it's literally gonna be silent, not even a whisper of a fish until like 10, 11 o'clock, and then there'll be a 40-inch bass swing through. That's my call. If I was correct, I'm gonna have a podcast clip of this part of the podcast on my YouTube channel, which is Striped Bass Hunt. which is where this shows out and everything like that. And it's gonna have a picture, which is inserted right now over me or beside me or wherever, of the 40-inch bass. Now, and if that happens, it happens. If it doesn't, then you won't see the clip, so you'll know I didn't catch it. But yeah, that's my, if I had to really bet some money, it would be that. That's how the bite's gonna go. And then as it gets closer to lower tide, right at sunset, that's when I can really start swimming out to some boulders, and I can really start getting into some spicy fishing. And the thing is, because there's some boulders that I swim out to that at high tide they're too deep to swim to. But they don't generally produce, well, I lied, they can produce crazy bites, but they produce the biggest bass ever out there. So hopefully we can hit that around the moon phase. And this is something that I didn't know last moon phase. So this is a whole new world, and it's a whole new podcast. Anyway, yeah, so we started this at 7. It's now almost 8:20. So it means we're going for roughly an hour and a half, or roughly hour and 20 minutes, I guess. But like, yeah, almost an hour and a half. So yeah, that's good. That's probably a good solid podcast for you guys there. I hope you still respect me after I was an idiot about the rod. And yeah, anyway, I've just been an idiot on this podcast. I'm so tired. I was up early fishing. I'm like been working like crazy trying to get prepared for this this moon phase. So I'm like super tired because I've been doing a lot of preparation. Anyway, but that's besides the point. The real point is, hopefully you guys can take a little bit out of this podcast, apply it to your own areas, and you can do better than I do during this full moon and get some 40, 50 pound bass, you know, something light like that, right? I get, sometimes people get angry at me for talking about catching such big fish so easily. You know, when I talk about like how 30, 40 pound bass or 50 pound bass are around, like I talk like they're around, like always. And that's because they are. It's just about people catching them, you know? Get angry all you want, they're around. You just got to put your time in, you'll get them. Anyway, so thank you guys for listening to this podcast, and I'll see you next time.